The Facilitator MD, back at you again. It's 1994. There's a new TV show called New York Undercover.
A drug dealer is murdered. Williams and Torres find he has a whole lot of enemies.
Give us the name and we'll talk about his deal later, all right?
No, Earth to Abel, I am not a dealer. No, Bobo has an attitude.
Let me tell you, every week that show came on, I was running to watch it. It was a show about these young urban police officers in New York City fighting crime. Gangs, all this kind of the usual police versus the bad guys type theme. However, it had this R&B and hip hop vibe that I'd never seen before. The music, the soundtracks, the gear. They'd be wearing, stuff like borough gear, like Brooklyn and Queens, and a lot of the sights, the scenes were very familiar to those of us who grew up in New York. It was a show that truly influenced me, as many shows influence individuals as they're growing up. It was a show that I saw myself in certain scenarios in one of the main characters, J.C. Williams, played by Malik Yoba. That was a long time ago, but we think about where are some of those people now? Malik Yoba, since then, in addition to acting in many other roles in other movies and programs, has embarked on a mission. His company now travels the world bringing economic development to people who normally don't have representation. Real estate and the acquisition and maintenance of land has been one of the best ways to acquire, maintain, and pass on wealth in the Western Hemisphere. Malik Yoba has created this development program in an effort to use his stardom to help others help themselves. We met with Malik Yoba recently in Brazil and had an opportunity to speak to him about what he's doing now, how he's doing it, and how this came to be. Malik Yoba, the new economic development king. The Facilitator MD. Growing up in New York and you being a vehicle through which the culture in the 80s and 90s was dispersed to millions of young people of all races, how would you say music has affected your ability now as an entrepreneur to impact the world through your Yoba Development initiative?
How music has?
How did music growing up in your soul, in your ears, in your mind affect who you are now as an entrepreneur?
Wow, that's a great question. Interesting question. But then what keeps coming to mind is, so I have this real estate documentary called The Real Estate Mixtape that I wrote and directed. I didn't really write it, it's a documentary. Although there's a narrative that I sort of pulled from the actual interviews. But it's funny because I can't help but think about, as an entrepreneur, how using film has really been a Trojan horse to drive my opportunities in development, both on the development side as well as the development of human capital on the education side. So what comes to mind when you ask that question is, when I grew up in Harlem in the 70s and 80s, when it was burnt out, cracked out, rubble, pissy mattresses, and empty lots, those are where these dreams began for development. And so when I was editing what became the real estate mixtape, that wasn't the name when I shot it. It was the project's called I Built New York. It was in my editing process and how I approached it. Because typically with a documentary, you shoot all your interviews, and then you would transcribe the footage and then pull the story from the footage. But I didn't do that. Because I directed it and I knew where my footage was, as I began to cut it together, I'm like, oh, I want to go from this moment to that moment, to this moment to that moment. I'm going to use this song to create an emotional response, or to make people more thoughtful in a moment, or reflective, whatever it might be. Music drives that, right? And adds to the emotional nature of the piece. But one song in particular, I was in a restaurant and I heard the Bobby Womack song, Across 110th Street. And at that time, I'd been curating images, still images that I knew I wanted to use in the documentary. And the first thing I edited were these old images of old New York in the 70s and 80s when it was cracked out, burnt out, which looked like the Harlem I remember. And if you listen to that song, just the tempo of the song and how it increases at certain points, it was a challenge for me visually to say, you know what, I want to take these images and I want to cut them to that song. So how music impacts Yoba Development and my business as an entrepreneur significantly, because that very opening song of the first episode of the Real Estate Mixtape, every time I screen it somewhere and I press play and that song comes on with those images, I think about how organically I came to that moment to decide that's the song, because I also grew up on 108th Street and First Avenue in Harlem. So 110th Street was 2 blocks away. So when that movie came out, where that song is from, there was always this like association with like, yo, that's a movie about our neighborhood. And so to edit this film and use that song, it really is sort of like the entry point for people to experience this material, which really has driven my business. So I don't know if that answers your question, but absolutely, it's a pretty deep one for me, because I can't hear that song now without seeing the images that I cut to that song.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do you view your program development, your building development in terms of economic prowess of the dollar? In other words, the United States right now, the dollar is being devalued. It has been and it continues to devalue. So how does that affect your dream of development in the United States? Now, outside the U.S. is a different story.
Right.
Because that makes sense in Brazil and South Africa. But in the United States, that's really a question, and I can ask you that.
I mean, I think from a economic perspective, there's always going to be cycles, right? So whether it's inflation, whether it's mortgage rates, whether it's rates to acquire capital from a debt perspective, right? Money's very expensive to get. So there's two parts of that for me. One, there's 7 million units of housing that need to be built in America to address the housing crisis, right? Lack of inventory. As more people understand the business of development, particularly our people, I believe that we will be able to impact that, because there's just going to be more opportunities for more people to get into the game, right? So that's going to drive down. That's going to drive down the scarcity, or drive up. You know what I'm saying? Not drive up the scarcity, but it's going to address the scarcity issue. So I think that's one. I think in the short term, the projects that we're currently working on, I feel fortunate that I have partners that are well capitalized. So that's a little less of an issue in certain instances, but it's not going to stop me from playing in the space. I mean, development has been going on since the beginning of time, right? And so, in different degrees, right? But certainly since the New Deal, when the federal government was really building a middle class and, deploying capital into communities that we couldn't buy in, right? There's been this effort to continue to increase the housing stock. So for me, I just focus on the goal. And that's true with everything. Even being an actor, I don't focus on how hard it is or what the challenges are. Like, what is our objective? And just keep moving in the direction of the objective. And then magic happens. Opportunities happen, right? Currently, with current projects, we haven't run into major like financial issues or, you know, dealing directly with the decreased value of the dollar, but it's not happening like right this second that's it, you know, impacting us.
So I asked this question specifically because your answer is absolutely correct, and I want people listening to understand the power of real estate, and that is that despite the economic volatility of the dollar, if you're going to operate in a space where you are buffered from that volatility, real estate is the place to be.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, it's not always the right time to invest or to buy, you know, whether you're investing in development or buying for some people. But, you know, it's one of those things, man, where when you have access to capital at a high level, things move very, very different, right? If you know, just by, and this is one of the issues, right? As Black people, access to capital is very, very difficult, especially as Black developers. I've got partners that are Italian, I got partners that are Indian, I have partners that are Black, and the reality is, like, Italian family that's sitting on a lot of cash, it's a very different proposition, even if you're going to get debt, right? If you or I might go, based on our financial transactions historically, that debt might be at, I don't know, 10%, say, right? One of my partners can go get the same $100 million at 3%. Right, so that's the unfair advantage.
Which is significant
difference. I think that's an unfair advantage because historically we haven't had access to that kind of capital. So for me, as I move in this journey, I've been able to attract the right type of people to partner with to be able to execute. And I don't take that lightly because that's not the case for every deal, every partner that I've had historically. But where I sit right now. And that's part of the reason why I continue, because it's working.
I grew up in Long Island. Now, Long Island is only a couple miles away, but in New York terminology, we don't get a lot of love because we're not Harlem.
Bridge and tunnel, baby.
Right?
Bridge and tunnel.
We don't get a lot of love because we're not on the island. But I did live at 120th and 5th Avenue from 2008 to 2012, Marcus Garvey Park apartment. I won't tell you apartment because I'm still renting it in case you want to trash my walls. But when I lived in Harlem,
you lived at New Development next to the church.
That's
my building. Fancy.
That's
I got it. So my mother went to that school. That was her elementary school before it became a church. And in that park is where I built the little BMX track when I was 18. No, the story I was telling was I met with a guy named Pelham Fritz who worked for the Parks Department, Trinity, like you.
Okay.
He works for like the city, like for the all of Manhattan. When I met with him, so here's a crazy story about that dude. So when I met with him, and he said, I approached him and said I want to build this BMX track in Central Park. I need 4 acres. I need $1.5 million. These are all the things I needed. And he's listening to me like, never gonna happen, kid, right? So word on the street in New York was there was a little track in Harlem. And it was on 120th Street and 5th Avenue in that park.
In Marcus Garvey Park.
So I ride my bike up to the park one day. I see this little trail that kids used to ride their bike. And so I went and got an old school Savarin coffee can, the metal ones, and a stick. I started digging into the ground and building jumps on that little trail. Other kids started coming. And I'm like, yo, you go get a bucket, you go get a shovel, you go get tires that we could line the track with the tires. And we're digging in the dirt, building the track, even though the city told me I couldn't build one. I'm doing it anyway in Marcus Garvey Park. The guy who worked for the park comes out of that building in the middle of the park. And he's like, hey, what are you kids doing? And the other kids are about to run. I'm like, no, don't run. And I say, yo, do you know who Pelham Fritz is? I'm like, that's your boss. He told us we could do this. Straight lying. The dude gets back in his truck, drives to the building, talks to somebody, comes back out, honks the horn, gives us the thumbs up. We keep digging in the dirt, building a track in Marcus Garvey Park. Years later, that building in that park is named Pelham Fritz, after the dude that I met with when I was 17.
You know, there's an amphitheater there now.
Yeah, did you hear what I just said though? How that shit came full circle? Don't skip over that shit.
No.
No, I know the amphitheater.
So I want to ask,
Yeah.
that amphitheater, is that where the trail was?
No, so if you're when you come around Mount Morris Park, as it was called, Mount Morris Park.
Marcus Garvey.
So if you came from 120th Street, so 120th Street's on the corner, right here, 5th Avenue, that little street that wraps around the park.
Yes.
On that, so there's a building in the middle of the park, just to the
Not
left
on the
of it.
baseball side.
No, so where the baseball field is now,
Yeah.
there's a patch of dirt between that
okay.
wall
And
and the
the
baseball,
baseball
field.
field.
That's where the track was,
Okay, all right,
which
so
is
that's
right next to the building.
Facing north is to the left.
So if you were facing east, it's to your right.
Right. Okay, I know
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Because my building on 120th, my window overlooks
The park.
the south
Is that where
side
you
of the
live now?
park. I live there, but I still rent it.
Okay.
Right, so it's still my apartment, but I go and when I look out the window, I can see the water tower
Yeah.
and the baseball field is to the left.
Yeah.
The new barbecue area
Yeah.
is now because Harlem has undergone some major changes. So before there used to be drumming circles on Sunday. Now people have been, there are noise ordinances. You must barbecue to
And
the
that's
right.
why we got to
You
be
cannot
in the
barbecue
real
to the
estate
left.
game, because white folks come into the community, they own property, and then they get involved with the community boards, and that's how those ordinances change. That's the part that we just complain about saying. And I remember the first white woman to own a property on that park. She was on the 120th side, right before you got to 5th Avenue, one of those brownstones right there. So when I was a kid digging in the dirt, this white woman used to be coming in and out, cleaning her brownstone steps. She was the only one in that whole neighborhood. Now it's mostly white folks.
It's
that own
mostly
it.
it's still a lot of black people, but like in my building, when you go to the monthly unit meetings, owner meetings, I was one of the few black people, and now granted, it was a brand new building at the time, probably the tallest building in Harlem.
It is the tallest building.
27 or 26 stories. Mine's
Well,
on
new construction.
New construction, tallest new construction in Harlem.
Well, now we got the Renaissance Hotel, which is a black developer, by the way.
Okay, so
Craig Livingston.
that's dead now. So, but that building really started. You started to see a push for noise control. People congregating on Sundays and Saturdays. Barbecue now, there are designated barbecue areas. You cannot just barbecue anywhere in Marcus Garvey Park anymore.
White folks
Right?
coming in with the bullshit.
It's power. It's power. It's exercising power. And that goes back to, number one, I appreciate that story, but it goes back to what you're doing, right? Which is, power is economic, it's political, and it's financial.
Well, before that, it's information. It's knowledge.
And
knowledge is power.
knowledge.
Like once you know,
Then
you know how to go get it.
you
can't-
know now how to strategize
Right.
to achieve these things. And I think one of the biggest ways African Americans, actually I can speak globally, have lost out on the acquisition of power is, one, being excluded from information, I'll take that, and two, not being able to pool resources to control regions, particularly land.
Yeah.
And your development process not only will help many people in the United States, but here we are in Brazil, same problem.
Bro,
You
I
take
just
the
left.
same strategy
I
and
just
duplicate
left South Africa. It's the same issue in Africa, where black Africans, particularly in South Africa, do not have the resources to own the land that is native to them, which is extraordinarily painful to hear. But the good side is that you do have people who are thinking along the same lines of like Nana, myself. And what we find is that we find each other. Like your vibe is your tribe, that's real. And so everywhere I'm going across the globe, I'm meeting these people that are doing the same type of work. And so this is why my company has 3 verticals. There's a real estate, education, and the media, because the knowledge can be, the transfer of knowledge can be accelerated using this, right? Telling the stories, giving people access to this information. Like even my doc, you're not gonna find it on a streamer, you're not gonna find it on television, because I didn't make it for that, because I already know how Hollywood works. I'm not trying to have some executive tell me, oh, there's no audience for this. I'm like, fuck you. I already know there's no audience. I've just been seen by almost 1.5 million people. I've been in 50 cities. It's been streamed online.
So if we want to see it,
I'd have to give you a link.
I see. So the public right now, we're not able to see it yet.
But I am my own distribution, which I love.
Okay.
Because, like I said, I've been to almost 50 cities in the last 2 years, and I pull up at a real estate conference, at like 2 weeks I'm at Columbia University screening, and then, at the Columbia Business School for the black students that are in the real estate program and the master's degree business program. April, I'll be up in Yonkers screening on Mount Vernon. No, Yonkers, with the mayor. So I'm partners with a group called NARAB, which is National Association of Real Estate Brokers. This is a black-led organization that started in 1946. When black folks couldn't be realtors, they became realtists. So Courtney Johnson Rose, who's the president, she is a second-generation real estate developer out of Houston. So she was just elected last year to be president of that. So she just put together a 100-city wealth tour. So using those brokers, because they're in 135 cities as an organization. So as as brokers, right? They know where the bodies are in those communities, but most of them have been focused on transactional relationships, buying and selling. So because Courtney is a second-generation developer, under her leadership, she's like, nah, we're going to build wealth. We're going to start a developers academy so that these same people that buy and sell transactionally can understand how you get involved in the development process in the communities that we already serve, so we can own them. I'll be screening my doc at that. So I'm doing that. I'm like the Pied Piper. So
you are Master P right now. You're controlling your own work.
1,000%.
And in another 10 years, 15 years, 50 years, 5,000 years, it will still be Malik Yoba.
Yes, that's the goal.
And I think that is excellent. And I think that us being here in Brazil and interacting with Brazilian people and seeing the same inequality around the world, particularly against those who identify as black, diasporan black people, your strategy can be cookie cut and reapplied everywhere in the world. And I think that is something that is not only extremely viable, but it is something that is sustainable and scalable.
Absolutely.
Right? So that I wish you the best of luck with, and I'll be working, tangentially on the medical side with people like Nana. We have our own medical challenges, because you talk about how do you get power without information? How do you get information if you're dying of diabetes by the time you're 25 years old? If you're dying of coronary artery disease by the time you're 35, right? If nobody in the household can keep a job because they've got chronic illness because they have no access to care, or if care is accessible but inequitable, right? So I'll be working on that side. You're working on the real estate side. Nana's on the multiple sides, and I think we can have like a 3-pronged attack. And I appreciate your time. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon.
And the last thing I want to leave you with is, despite being from Long Island, which we always got left out.
You had EPMD. You had Public Enemy.
We had Public Enemy, EPMD. Don't forget K Solo. Don't forget.
I did forget K Solo.
Right, Coach K Solo. I love K Solo. By the way, without going into a list of rappers, I want to tell you that there are likely as many, if not more, Long Island rappers than Harlem rappers. From the 80s and 90s
that made it
to a point where we still
like De La Soul,
we still, right? So Long Island gets no love, But yet, if you look at the numbers, this is a number man. He's in real estate. The real estate deal makes no sense unless the numbers make sense. And I'm telling you,
You've done the research?
We've done the research, and Long Island has as many, if not more, rappers than Harlem did. Thank you so very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. See, the part he didn't talk about is how New York Undercover impacted his life